The scanner beeped 3 times, and senior researcher Tevrix felt his 4 eyes narrow with confusion as he stared at the results on his screen. Unable to believe what the machine was telling him about one of his colleagues on the station, he ran the scan again, certain that something had gone wrong with the equipment. But the results came back exactly the same, flashing red warnings across every category that his people had designed to identify dangerous species in the galaxy. Tevrix was a Corvani, and his species had spent thousands of years developing the most advanced threat assessment technology in the known universe. Technology that could read the genetic code of any living creature and determine exactly how dangerous it might be to others. The Galactic Union trusted the Corvani completely when it came to identifying predator species, and their scanners had never been wrong. Not once in all the centuries they had been in use across Union space. But today, something impossible had happened on the research station called Quiet Dawn, a station that orbited a newly discovered planet and housed 200 scientists from 12 different species. The Vafertim scanner had flagged a predator, and not just any predator, but something that triggered every single warning the system CompNet, Evrix, pulled up the file of the individual the scanner had identified. And he felt his pale blue skin grow even paler when he saw the name and the face that appeared on his screen. Dru Sojin, human xenobiologist, 3 years of service on Quiet Dawn. He knew this woman, and he could not understand how this gentle scientist could possibly be what the scanner claimed. Shiwasiojin was quiet and kind, the sort of person who remembered everyone's names and brought homemade food to share with her colleagues during mealtimes. The sort of person who stayed late to help others with their research and never complained about the extra work. She was small by most species standards. With dark hair she kept tied back and warm brown eyes that always seemed to be smiling. And Tevrix had never once felt threatened by her presence in the 3 years they had worked together. But the scanner told a different story. A story written in her very blood and bones. Pursuit predator markers confirmed. The report read, pack hunting instincts confirmed. Extreme environmental adaptability confirmed. Persistence hunting genetics confirmed. Threat level maximum. Tevrix stood up from his workstation and walked to the window of his laboratory, looking out at the stars while he tried to make sense of what he had discovered. Humans were a recently contacted species, having joined the Galactic Union only 50 years ago, and they had been classified as Category 3, which meant cooperative and low threat. They had been welcomed into Union space with open arms, seen as friendly and curious creatures who wanted nothing more than to explore and learn alongside the older species of the galaxy. Nothing in any official report suggested that humans were dangerous. Nothing at all yet. The Corvani scanners did not lie, and they did not make mistakes. And the technology had been designed by the greatest minds his species had ever produced specifically to identify predators who might hide among peaceful populations. Rix made a decision that weighed heavily on his conscience, but he knew it was necessary. He saved the scan results and walked through the curved corridors of Quiet Dawn until he reached the office of Station Commander Ilara, a Venthian who led their research outpost with logic and careful judgment. Ilara was an insect-like being with compound eyes and a hard exoskeleton, and she looked up from her work as Tevrix entered, her antennae twitching with curiosity at the expression on his face. "You look troubled, Senior Researcher," she said in her clicking voice. "What has happened?" Tevrix transferred the scan results to her display and watched as her compound eyes moved rapidly across the data, taking in every detail with the speed and precision her species was known for. "This cannot be correct," Ilara said after a long moment of silence. "Dr. Yoon is one of our most valued team members. She has never shown any sign of aggression or predatory behavior in all her time here. I ran the scan 3 times. Commander," Tevrix replied, "the results are consistent. A genetic code contains every marker we associate with apex predators. And not small markers either, but strong ones. The strongest I have ever seen in my career. Alara stood and walked to her window, her hard footsteps clicking against the metal floor as she considered the implications of what Tevrix had brought her. Humans have been in the Union for 50 years, she said slowly. If they were truly dangerous, would we not have seen evidence of this before now? That is what troubles me most, Tevrix admitted. Either our scanners have made their first mistake in thousands of years, or humans have been hiding their true nature from the entire galaxy since the day they made first contact. Neither option was comforting, and both of them knew it. What do you recommend? Alara asked, turning to face him with all the calm authority of her position. Tevrix had thought about this question during his walk to her office, and he had an answer ready, though he did not like it. Observation, he said. We watch Dr. Yoon without her knowledge. We study her behavior. We look for any sign that she might be what the scanner claims, and if we find nothing, then perhaps we can dismiss this as an error. And if we find something? Alara Tevrix did not have an answer for that question, and his silence spoke louder than any words could have commanded her. Alara nodded slowly and made her decision with the swift certainty her species was known for throughout the Union. Proceed with your observation, she ordered. But be discreet and tell no one else about this until we understand what we are dealing with. I will not have panic spreading through my station based on a single scan. Tevrix agreed and left her office, his mind spinning with questions that had no answers as he walked back toward his laboratory through the busy corridors of quiet Dawnhee, past dozens of his colleagues along the way. Scientists of many different species who worked together in peace and cooperation, united by their shared love of discovery and knowledge. And then he saw her. Dr. Yoon Seo-jin was walking toward him with a small container in her hands. And when she noticed him, her face lit up with a warm smile that seemed to radiate kindness and goodwill. Tevrix, she called out. I was hoping I would see you today. I made some dumplings last night and saved some for you because I remembered how much you liked them the last time. She held out the container toward him, and Tevrix forced himself to accept it with steady hands. Forced himself to smile back at her, even as his 4 eyes tracked her every movement. Searching for any sign of the predator, the scanner claimed she was. Thank you, Dr. Yoon, he managed to say. That is very kind of you. It is nothing, she said with a small wave of her hand. We are colleagues and friends, yes, and friends share food. That is what my grandmother always taught me. She continued on her way with another smile and a friendly nod. And Tevrix stood frozen in the corridor, holding the container of food she had given him. Watching her small form disappear around a corner, the scanner said she was a predator. The most dangerous kind of predator the Corvani had ever classified, but his eyes saw only a gentle woman who made dumplings for her. Friend Tevrix did not know which truth to believe, and that uncertainty frightened him more than anything else in his long career as a threat assessor for the Galactic Union. 3 days passed, and Tevrix spent every moment he could spare watching Dr. Yoon Seo-jin through the security feeds and through careful, direct observation that he hoped she would not notice. He watched her wake early each morning and exercise in her quarters, moving her body through stretches and movements that seemed both graceful and purposeful in ways he could not quite understand. He watched her eat breakfast alone in the cafeteria, always choosing a seat near the window where she could look out at the stars while she drank her morning tea. He watched her work in her laboratory, studying samples from the planet below with patience and care, recording her findings in detailed notes that showed how much she loved her research. And he watched her tend to the station's botanical garden during her free time, caring for plants from dozens of different worlds with gentle hands and soft words that she spoke to them as if they could hear her. Nothing he observed matched what the scanner had told him. Nothing at all on the second day of his observation. Tevrick saw something that confused him even more. A young Morellian intern named Keth had been struggling since arriving on the station 2 weeks ago. Overwhelmed by homesickness and the pressure of working so far from everything familiar, the Morellians were small beings covered in soft fur, with large ears and bigger eyes. And young Keth had been seen crying in corners when he thought no one was. Watching, Tevrick saw Seo-jin approach the young intern during a quiet moment in the garden, and he expected her to offer some polite words of encouragement before moving on with her day. Instead, she sat down beside Keth on the bench and simply stayed there, asking him gentle questions about his home and his family and the things he missed most. She listened to his answers with genuine interest, nodding and making small sounds of understanding. And when Keth began to cry, she did not look away or seem uncomfortable as many species did when faced with another's tears. She simply handed him a cloth to dry his eyes and told him that missing home was not weakness, that it showed how much love he carried in his heart, and that love would give him strength if he let it. Keth stopped crying and looked at her with wonder in his large eyes. And Seo-jin smiled and invited him to help her water the plants, turning his sadness into something useful and good. Tevrick recorded this interaction in his observation notes, but he did not know what to make of it that night. He accessed the Union databases and began researching human history, hoping to find some answer to the contradiction between the scan results and his own observations. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans had evolved on a planet called Earth, a world that the Union classified as a Category 5 death world due to its extreme conditions and the dangerous creatures that lived there. The database contained images and information about Earth's predators, and Tevrick felt his skin grow cold as he scrolled through pictures of creatures with massive teeth and claws. Creatures that could kill with a single bite. Creatures that hunted in darkness and water and everywhere in between. But humans had not merely survived among these monsters. They had thrived. They had spread across every environment their planet contained. From frozen wastelands where temperatures dropped far below what most species could endure, to burning deserts where water was scarce and the sun could kill, and they had done something else. Something that made Tevrick's S4 eyes widen with a new kind of fear. They had hunted not like most predators, who use speed or strength or venom to catch their prey quickly. Humans had hunted through persistence, chasing their prey across vast distances, never stopping, never tiring, following the trail for hours or even days, until their target collapsed from exhaustion. The database called it persistence hunting, and it was a method so terrifying in its patience and determination that Tevrick could barely comprehend it. And there was more. Humans had taken wolves, another predator species known for pack hunting and sharp teeth, and they had made these creatures their companions, their friends, their family. They had bonded with predators, lived alongside them, loved them. What kind of species could do such a thing? Tevrick closed the database and sat in darkness for a long time, trying to understand what he had learned. The next day, he decided to speak with Seo-jin directly, approaching her in the garden under the pretense of academic curiosity about her homeworld. She welcomed his questions with obvious delight, happy to share stories of Earth with someone who seemed genuinely interested. Earth is beautiful, she told him as she pruned a flowering plant from her home continent. We have mountains so tall that their peaks are always covered in snow, and oceans so deep that we still have not explored them all, and forests so thick that sunlight barely reaches the ground. It sounds like a challenging place to live, Tevrick said carefully. Seo-jin laughed at that, a light and pleasant sound that seemed entirely free of any threat. I suppose it can be, she agreed. My grandmother survived a war when she was young, and my father worked on fishing boats in waters so cold that falling in meant death within minutes. But these things made them strong, made all of us strong. She spoke of these things casually, as if they were simply normal parts of life, and Tevrix realized with a start that to her, they were surviving wars and deadly waters and extreme temperatures was not extraordinary for humans. It was simply what they did, what they had always done. Your species is very adaptable, he said. And his voice came out quieter than he intended. We have to be, Sojin replied with a small shrug. Earth taught us that lesson a long time ago, and we learned it well, adapt or die. That is the rule of our world. She returned to her pruning, humming softly to herself. And Tevrix watched her small hands work with gentle precision on the delicate plant. This woman was a persistence predator, descended from hunters who chased their prey to exhaustion, raised on a death world that had forged her species into something harder and more dangerous than any other intelligent life the galaxy had ever known, and yet she spent her free time caring for flowers and comforting homesick children that evening. Tevrix sat in his quarters and thought about everything he had seen and learned over the past 3 days. The scanner was not wrong. He realized at last, humans were predators, real predators. The kind that the Corvani had spent millennia learning to identify and fear. But perhaps being a predator did not mean what he had always thought it meant. Perhaps humans had learned to choose what they did with their predator instincts, learned to direct those ancient hunting drives towards something other than killing and consuming. Perhaps they were protectors instead of hunters, guardians instead of threats. The thought was still forming in his mind when the alarm began to sound throughout the station. A piercing wail that meant only one thing: danger. Something had breached the outer hull of quiet dawn. Unknown life forms were entering the station, and as Tevrix ran toward his assigned emergency station, he heard Commander Ilara's voice over the intercom. Calm but urgent. All personnel to secure zones immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat. This is not a drill. The observation was over. Whatever came next would show Tevrix the truth about humans once and for all. Chaos erupted through the corridors of quiet dawn as scientists fled toward the emergency shelters, their screams echoing off the metal walls, while security officers shouted orders that no one seemed to hear. Tevrix pushed through the crowd, his 4 eyes scanning frantically for any sign of what had invaded their station. And then he saw one of theme of Rex's blood turn to ice in his veins. The Rexith were the nightmares of the galaxy, a predator species that the Union had been hunting for decades without success. Raiders who attacked stations and ships and colonies, who consumed other species for food, who left no survivors behind to tell stories of their cruelty. This one stood at the end of the corridor, nearly 3 meters tall, with armored skin the color of dried blood and 4 arms that ended in claws, sharp enough to tear through metal. It saw the fleeing scientists and made a sound that might have been laughter, a clicking hiss that promised pain and death to everyone who heard it. Tevrix ran. He ran until he found a maintenance shaft and crawled inside, his thin body barely fitting through the narrow space, and he stayed there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of screaming and violence that echoed through the station while Rexith had boarded. He learned later, 12 of the deadliest hunters in the galaxy, and the station's security forces had been overwhelmed within minutes. But Tevrix did not know that yet. As he hid in the shaft, trembling with fear, his mind racing through possibilities and finding no hope in any of them, then he remembered the security feeds, and he pulled out his portable terminal and accessed the station's cameras with shaking hands. He needed to see what was happening, needed to know if there was any chance of survival. The feed showed horror after horror. Rexith hunters moving through corridors and cutting down anyone they found, bodies lying still on the floor, equipment smashed and scattered everywhere. And then one camera showed him something different. The botanical garden Dar Yun So-jin stood in the center of the room, and she was not alone. 3 Morellian interns huddled behind her, including young Keth. who Tevrix had watched her comfort just 2 days ago. Garden's emergency doors had sealed automatically when the attack began. But everyone on the station knew that those doors would not hold against a determined Raxith. For long, Tevrix expected to see fear on Sojin's face, expected to see panic, expected to see her looking for somewhere to hide, just as he was doing. What he saw instead made him forget to breathe. Something had changed in the human woman. Something fundamental and profound. She stood straight and still, her body positioned between the sealed door and the terrified children behind her. And her face held no expression that Tevrix could read. The gentle smile was gone. The warmth in her eyes had vanished. What remained was something cold and sharp and utterly focused. Something that made Tevrix think of the predator markers on his scanner results. She was assessing the situation. He realized, her eyes moving across the room with mechanical precision, noting exits and obstacles and potential weapons. Then she began to move. She spoke to the interns in a low, firm voice that cut through their panic, and though Tevrix could not hear the words through the camera feed, he saw the effect they had. The 3 Morellians stopped crying and listened, their large eyes fixed on her face. With desperate hope, she pointed to a spot behind a row of heavy planting containers, and the interns moved there immediately, tucking themselves into the small space she had indicated. Then Sojin turned to the gardening tools that hung on the wall. Nearby, Tevrix watched as she selected a pruning saw and a long metal stake used for supporting tall plants, and he watched as she tested their weight and balance with quick, efficient movements. She was not hiding, she was preparing. One of the interns, Keth, called out something that Tevrix could see but not hear, and Sojin turned to look at him for just a moment. Whatever she said in response was brief, just a few words, but the young Morellian's trembling stopped, and he nodded with something that looked almost like trust. Tevrix would learn later what she had said. I will not let them take you. The sealed door began to shake as something heavy slammed against it from the other side, and Tevrix saw Sojin turn to face it with her improvised weapons ready. She did not retreat to hide with the children. She did not call for help that could not come. She stood her ground, alone, a small human female, against whatever horror was about to break through that door. Tevrix thought about everything he had learned during his observation. The persistence hunting, the adaptation to death world conditions, the pack bonding instincts that made wolves into family, and he finally understood. The scanner had identified Sojin as a predator because that was exactly what she was. But predators came in different forms and served different purposes. Some hunted the weak and helpless. Others protected them. Humans had evolved to do both, and they chose which role to play based on the situation they faced right now. With 3 frightened children behind her and monsters at the door, Sojin had made her choice. She was not prey waiting to be taken. She was a guardian preparing to fight. The door buckled inward, metal tearing like paper under the strength of whatever pushed against it. And through the gap, Tevrix could see armored red skin and claws that gleamed in the garden's artificial light of Raxith. Maybe, too, coming for easy prey, they would find something else entirely. Jin adjusted her grip on her weapons and took a breath. And Tevrix saw her muscles tense with readiness. There was no fear in her posture, no hesitation in her stance. The woman who made dumplings for her colleagues and comforted homesick children had become something else entirely. Something that the Vraxith had never encountered in all their years of raiding and killing. A human protecting her pack. The door gave way with a shriek of tortured metal, and the first Vraxith pushed through the opening, its forearms spread wide, and its clicking laughter echoing through the garden. It saw Sojin standing before it, small and soft and alone, and its laughter grew louder. It dismissed her. It looked past her to the Morellians hiding behind the planters, seeing them as the real prizes, the easy meat it had come to claim. That was its mystic. Sojin did not wait for it to attack. She moved first, fast and low, not toward the creature but to the side, Using the rows of plants and containers as cover, the Vraxith turned to track her, confused by prey that did not run or freeze. And in that moment of confusion, as Hyojin struck, she did not try to match its strengths. She used something else. Something the creature had never faced before. She used patience and precision, and the cold calculation of a species that had learned to hunt by never giving up. The predator had become the prey, and it did not even realize what was happening until it was far too late. The first Vraxith died without understanding how it happened. One moment it was reaching for the human female with all four of its clawed arms, confident in its strength and armor, certain that this small creature would fall as easily as every other prey species it had ever hunted. Next moment its eyes were burning with chemical fire as Hyojin threw a container of concentrated fertilizer directly into its face, and it was screaming in agony, its arms flailing blindly as it tried to clear its vision. Hyojin did not give it time to recover. She moved beneath its wild swings with the fluid grace of something that had practiced this dance 1,000 times in the memories of her ancestors. And she drove the metal stake upward into the gap where the creature's neck met its armored body. The Vraxith fell, and it did not rise again. The second raider had followed its partner through the broken door, and it stopped at the sight of the fallen hunter, something new flickering in its predator eyes, hesitation. It had never seen one of its own killed by prey before, never imagined that such a thing was possible. And for a precious moment, it did not know what to do. Hyojin did not hesitate at all. She pulled her weapon free from the first creature and faced the second, her clothes stained with alien blood, her breath coming fast but controlled, her eyes fixed on her enemy with absolute focus. The Vraxith made a decision and lunged at her with a roar of rage, determined to avenge its fallen pack member and prove that humans were nothing special. Nothing to fear. It was wrong. Hyojin used the garden against it, leading it through rows of plants and containers, never staying in one place long enough for its superior reach to matter, never giving it a clean strike with those deadly claws. She cut it with the pruning saw whenever it overextended, small wounds that bled and slowed it down, and she stayed patient while it grew frustrated and angry and careless when it finally fell, exhausted and bleeding from a dozen injuries. Hyojin ended it quickly. There was no cruelty in the killing, no pleasure, just the efficient action of a predator who had won and wanted the fight to be over. She stood among the bodies of two Vraxith hunters, breathing hard, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. And then she turned to check on the interns. All three Morellians were alive and unharmed, their large eyes staring at her with something between terror and awe. "Are you hurt?" she asked them, and her voice was gentle again, the cold predator fading back beneath the surface to make room for the woman they knew. They shook their heads, unable to speak, and Hyojin nodded and helped them to their feet with soft words of comfort. Tevrix watched all of this through his terminal screen, and he felt something shift inside himself. Something that had been frozen with fear since the attack began. If a human could fight back, then perhaps there was hope. Perhaps they did not all have to die today. Climbed out of the maintenance shaft and made his way through the station's back corridors, using his knowledge of Quiet Dawn's layout to avoid the Vraxith patrols that still hunted through the main hallways. He found other survivors hiding in storage rooms and laboratories, frightened scientists of many different species who had given up hope of rescue. Tevrix told them about Dr. Yoon and what she had done in the garden, and he saw that same spark of hope kindle in their eyes. Then he accessed the station's intercom system and contacted Hyojin directly, his voice shaking as he told her that he could see the Vraxith positions through the security feeds and guide her through safe paths. "Tevrix," she said, and despite everything, he heard warmth in her voice when she recognized him. "Thank you. We need to reach the command center and restore the station defenses. Can you help us get there?" "Yes," he said, and he meant it more than he had ever meant anything. I can help. What followed was the longest hour of Tevrik's life. He guided Seo Jin and a growing group of survivors through maintenance tunnels and service corridors, watching through cameras and warning them whenever Raxith hunters drew near. Seo Jin led from the front, always placing herself between danger and the others. And Tevrik saw how the survivors looked at her now. They did not see a small human female anymore. They saw something else. Something that gave them courage they did not know they had. Not everyone survived the journey. A Corvani engineer named Prill was caught by a Vraxith in a crossing corridor, and there was nothing anyone could do to save him. An elderly Ventian scientist collapsed from stress and had to be carried, slowing the group enough that another hunter nearly found them. Seo Jin mourned each loss. Tevrix could see the grief on her face every time someone fell. But she did not let that grief stop Hirsch. She could not afford to stop. The command center lay ahead, and with it, the controls that could seal the station and activate the automated defenses that might drive the remaining Vraxith away. When they finally reached the door, they found it guarded. 4 Vraxith stood in the corridor outside, and Commander Ilara was visible through the window, injured but alive. Held captive, Seo Jin stopped the group and assessed the situation, her eyes moving with that same cold precision Tevrix had seen in the garden. "Stay here," she told the others. "Keep hidden and wait for my signal. You cannot fight 4 of them alone," a Morellian survivor protested. "That is impossible, even for you." Sojin looked at him, and something ancient and fierce flickered in her brown eyes. "You have not seen what humans can do when we have something to protect," she said quietly. "Wait here." Tevrix watched through the cameras as she moved toward the command center, his heart's pounding with fear and something else. Something that might have been Faith. Commander Ilara saw her approach through the window and managed to catch her attention, shaking her head in a desperate signal to turn back. "That is impossible," Ilara said over a private channel that Tevrix intercepted. Even for a predator, Seo Jin paused just long enough to respond, and her words would echo in Tevrix's mind for the rest of his life. "You have never seen what humans do for family." Then she stepped around the corner, and the 4 Vraxith hunters turned to face her with eager clicks and hisses. She was small, she was alone, she was covered in the blood of their fallen brothers, and she was not afraid. "This is your one chance," she called out to them in a voice that carried through the corridor. "Leave now, take your dead, never return to this station, and I will let you live." The Vraxith laughed. That horrible clicking sound that Tevrix had heard echoing through the station since the attack began. They did not negotiate with prey, they moved toward her. 4 hunters against 1 small human. Confident that this would be easy, that this would be fun. They were so very wrong. The first Vraxith to reach Seo Jin learned a lesson that its species would remember for generations. It swung at her with all the confidence of a creature that had never known defeat, and she was not there when its claws cut through the air where she had been standing. She had moved, not backward as prey should move, but sideways and low, slipping beneath its guard with a speed that should have been impossible for something so small. Her blade caught it across the back of its knee, and it stumbled, and before it could recover, she was past it, using its falling body as a shield against the others. 3 Vraxith remained standing, and now they understood that this was not going to be easy. They spread out, trying to surround her, trying to use their numbers to corner this strange prey that fought back with such terrifying skill. Seo Jin did not let them. She kept moving, kept striking, kept refusing to stand still and die the way prey was supposed to die. The corridor became a battleground, and Tevrix watched through the camera feeds with his 4 eyes wide, unable to look away from the impossible sight before him. Seo Jin was bleeding now. A claw had caught her across the shoulder, and another had torn a gash in her leg, but she did not stop, did not slow. did not show any sign that her wounds mattered at all. She fought the way her ancestors had hunted, with patience and persistence and the absolute refusal to give up. The second, Raxith, fell when she lured it into a doorway and triggered the emergency seal, crushing it beneath the heavy metal door. The third died when she turned its own momentum against it, stepping aside at the last moment and driving her blade into the gap in its armor as it rushed past. The fourth saw its three companions dead and felt something it had never experienced before in its long career as a hunter ferret. Looked at the small human female standing before it, covered in blood, both her own and alien, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her body shaking with exhaustion, but her eyes still burning with that terrible cold fire. And the Vraxith made a choice that no member of its species had ever made before it. Ranit turned and fled down the corridor, broadcasting a warning to any of its kind who might be listening. A message that Tevrix would later translate from the Vraxith language. Avoid this place. Avoid this species. They are not prey. They are death that wears soft skin. Seojin did not chase it, she let it go. And later, she would say that she wanted the others to know, wanted them to understand that humans were not easy targets, wanted to save future stations and ships from attacks that would never come because Raxith had learned to fear, but Tevrix suspected there was another reason too. She was simply too tired to chase it, and too merciful to kill something that had chosen to run. The survivors rushed forward when Seojin gave the signal, and they found Commander Ilara and the other hostages alive inside the command center. Ilara's compound eyes locked onto Seojin as the human woman limped through the door. And the Venthian commander did something that her species almost never did. She bowed. "You saved us all," Ilara said, her clicking voice heavy with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you." Seojin shook her head and nearly fell. And it was Tevrix who reached her first, catching her small body before she could hit the floor. "No thanks needed," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "You are my people now. Protecting people is what humans do." She lost consciousness then, and Tevrix carried her to the medical bay while the restored station defenses drove the remaining Raxith away. Seojin spent 3 weeks recovering from her wounds. And during that time, the crew of Quiet Dawn took turns sitting beside her bed, bringing her food and flowers and small gifts that they hoped would show their gratitude. The 3 Morellian interns came every day without fail, and young Kath in particular refused to leave her side for more than a few hours at a time. When she finally woke, she found her room filled with people who had become something more than colleagues, something more than friends. Family. Tevrix visited her on the day she was well enough to sit up, and he brought something with him, her personnel file. "I have updated your classification," he told her, and he showed her the screen where her species designation had been changed. It no longer said Category 3, Cooperative, Low Threat. It now read Predator, Protector, Ally. Seojin looked at the words for a long moment, and then she laughed, a sound that made Tevrix's hearts feel lighter than they had since the attack. "I suppose that is accurate enough," she said with a small smile. Commander Ilara submitted a formal report to the Galactic Union, recommending that humans be reclassified throughout all Union space, not as a threat, she wrote, but as something the galaxy desperately needs: protectors, guardians, the kind of predators who choose to hunt monsters instead of prey. The Union Council debated her recommendation for months, and in the end, they agreed humans were officially recognized as a guardian species, allies to be trusted and protected and cherished, not because they were harmless, but because they were dangerous in all the right ways. 6 months after the attack, Seojin stood in the botanical garden once again, her hands working gently among the plants as afternoon light filtered through the windows. The garden had been damaged during the fighting, but she had rebuilt it with help from her friends. And now it bloomed more beautifully than ever before. A new intern approached her, nervous and uncertain. A young Corvani with pale blue skin and 4 eyes that reminded her of Tevrik's. "Dr. Yoon?" he said hesitantly. "I read the reports about what happened here, about what you did, and I wanted to ask you something." Seo-jin looked up from her work and smiled at him with the same warmth she had always shown to everyone on the station. "Of course," she said. "What would you like to know?" The young Corvani fidgeted with his hands, clearly nervous about asking his question. "Are humans really as dangerous as the reports say?" he asked finally. "As dangerous as the scanners claim?" Seo-jin considered the question for a moment, and then she reached out and handed him a small flowering plant from her homeworld, one that needed care and patience to grow. "Yes," she said simply. "We are exactly as dangerous as the reports say." The intern's 4 eyes went wide with fear, and Seo-jin's smile grew gentler. "But only to those who threaten the people we love." She returned to her work, humming a soft song from Earth, and the young Corvani stood beside her, holding the plant she had given him, watching the human woman tend her garden with gentle hands. The predator was at rest, but the galaxy now knew that when those she loved were threatened, she would wake again, and she would never, ever stop until they were safe.